Thank you for joining us for another episode of Deals A to Z. We are interviewing seller financing experts in this series of Deals A to Z. And today, I've got, of course, my co-host, Jeff Brailio, and our special guest, Matt Atkinson. Thank you, muchacho, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering if I'm the expert on how to do real estate deals from A to Z on flipping or on seller financing. Who did you guys choose for rentals and flips?
Oh, there's other experts out there, Matt.
I agree. I would like to know who I could learn from too, so I can help endorse your guys' channel. I'm just excited to be able to share about this today. You are correct. There's a lot of people that are extremely successful about flips and rentals.
We actually haven't done rentals yet, but we've done flips.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
And
I'm happy to come back.
Yeah, and on our show though, we interview some really experienced people as well as newbies, because newbies very often have some really good learning experiences that we pull out that as we get more experience, we almost forget about some of the basic mistakes that newbies make. So we try to bring them on too to get a cross field.
That's good.
But Matt, you are serious in the seller financing world. Do you know how many seller finance deals that you've been involved in over the years, whether you bought, sold, coached, because you're a real estate coach, negotiated? How many transactions do you think you've seen that involve seller financing?
Probably 100 to 200.
That's significant, though. How many?
I would say normally I'm purchasing them myself. So it's not as often that I'm going to be helping people negotiate seller financing unless we're buying them or we're involved as a consultant. I think that a lot of people are not as familiar with seller financing or creative financing. It is a very underutilized strategy. There's a lot of different ways to make the situation beneficial for both the seller and the buyer or investor. So yeah, seller financing is a great way to buy more assets for sure.
Absolutely.
Great. Excellent. Well, today we're going to talk about a specific deal. And Matt, if you don't mind diving into how you found this deal that we're going to chat about today.
You bet. So this one's an amazing story because there's multiple ways how this property works. So if you were going to do how to A to Z, I'm going to share this example because this is encompassing in lots of different ways. So I bought a property about 11 years ago from a wholesaler, and the wholesaler needed to sell the property so the seller could take the proceeds, move to Idaho, and buy a new property. So the wholesaler brought the property to me, and they're like, hey, do you want to buy this property for approximately $90,000? And the ARV, or after repair value, was about maybe $160,000. And we're like, sure. And they always tell you a little up front about the details that are kind of the hairy part, right? So like, well, once you close on the property, this owner needs to live there for 3 months because they need to wait for their house to be built in Idaho. And we're like, no, we don't want to wait 3 months because our money costs us money also, right? So I said, how about this? What if we come up with an alternative to this solution? And this wholesaler is like, sure, what is that? I said, what if we buy the property for the price that we said, but we do a short-term seller financing for 2.5 months, and then 2 weeks before closing, because they were going to get a new loan in Idaho with a USDA, which stands for the United States Department of Agriculture. Well, for the USDA underwriting, they would actually need that property to be sold or paid off at least 1 week before closing, right? So he's like, I kind of like this idea, so tell me about it. So I said, okay, what if we do this? We'll put down $10,000, and that should give plenty of money for the borrower to finalize what needs they have for the construction deposit for Idaho. that I agree with that. And then we will buy the property with an all-inclusive deed of trust. And we will buy the property with an all-inclusive deed of trust. And then about 2 weeks before, we will allow the seller to make the mortgage payments for the next 2 months. So they just make them like normal. We won't remodel the property or do anything. And then 2 weeks before closing, we will come in with cash or hard money, pay the loan off. We're okay to let the seller stay there for 2 weeks. And then once they move out to Idaho, we can start remodeling the property. And the wholesaler's like, that's a great idea. Let's do it. So we ended up, so here's the cool thing. One, we bought the property with a short-term seller financing with an all-inclusive deed of trust. And the seller felt comfortable because we gave her $10,000. We were going to pay the wholesaler when we consummated the transaction or finished it. And so that's an awesome way that we bought it with seller financing. We ended up paying off the loan. We fixed up the property. We sold it. So here's an awesome flip. So if you wanted to use this for another class of like, hey, how to buy properties from A to Z with seller financing with the flip, this is a great story. So we bought the property with hard money then, and we took about maybe 30 to 45 days to fix up the property. So the cool thing is we were already on title, now going on 3.5 months. So we didn't have the FHA challenge that would prohibit you to put a new contract on the property less than 91 days. And I knew that going into that being a mortgage lender. So with us holding the title for about now 3.5 to 4 months, we fixed up the property and we ended up listing it on the multiple listing service, and we sold the property on the MLS. Okay. So about 4 years later, so this is kind of like when the market started going up a little bit, probably 2012, maybe 2013, a wholesaler contacted me saying, hey, we have a property under contract that we want to assign. Are you interested? And I said, sure. How much money do we need down? They're like $7,000. I said, okay. What is the current payment? The payment was about $1,100, maybe $1,200. And that's how much I could get for rent. It's a 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath house in Kearns without a garage. So I'm like, I think I'm down. I would be open to buy the property for about $7,000 out of pocket. What does that include paying you? That's including paying the wholesaler? So basically, the seller got like $1,000 to move out because they were gonna start being behind on the payments. So I ended up buying this property, and I bought my property back that I fixed and flipped 5 years earlier. This is the same house. So small world, right?
Yeah.
So the wholesaler brought us the property, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the house that I owned and I fixed and flipped. Of course I'm going to buy it, right? So I worked with that wholesaler. We worked on doing, and I actually bought that property subject to. So rather than doing an all-inclusive deed of trust, an AIDT, or a RAP is another way to call it, I did a subject to. The difference of an all-inclusive deed of trust, if for all those guys who are going to write this down, an all-inclusive deed of trust, I want a copy of the mortgage note. I want a copy of the mortgage statement, the most recent settlement statement to confirm the mortgage note matches the settlement statement. I also want a copy of the mortgage note to see if they did a loan modification, because that was very common, kind of like what we're experiencing right now with potential forbearances. We're not sure how that's going to play out, but I'm going to act as if that's going to probably happen. And then we also want a copy of a power of attorney for the seller, and we're going to draft the documents with an all-inclusive deed of trust. We need all those documents. Now, different for a subject to, the subject to language, and Jeff knows this, but I actually did some coaching with Bill Bronchek in 2014, and he has this amazing language with subject to that clearly writes out what the benefits and the risks are for the seller that they sign. So they can sign a bunch of stuff and say they don't understand, but there's multiple signatures for them, right? And obviously we want to make the payments on time, and we made the payments on time on both scenarios. But on a subject to, we're getting the same documents: a copy of the mortgage note, a mortgage statement, a a settlement statement to show that that mirrors the last time they've purchased or refinanced their home. We want a copy of their insurance. We want a copy of a power of attorney. So if they move, we can, fulfill that payment and make it. So we bought this property with seller financing, and we held it. I still own the property today. I'm actually in the process of selling it. Last year, the loan was called due. So we have a due on sell clause that was called due. So due to the due on sell clause that was called due, I actually got a hard money loan, paid off the note, and then by paying off the note, I had the tenant stay there. And then last fall, we identified any property that's older than 1960, that's a 3-bedroom, 1-bath that does not have a garage, we want to list and sell. So last year, I already identified like what type of properties I wanted to sell this year, regardless of COVID-19 or what economic situation we're in. So what's cool is we communicated with this tenant about 3 months ago, letting them know that we wanted to sell this property. So they actually just barely moved out last month, like literally a week ago, and we're gonna fix it up for about a week, and then we're going to list it in about 2 weeks. So what's cool, you talked about, hey, tell us about seller financing. What are the chances that I buy a property from a wholesaler, I buy it with seller financing for a short-term tool, I use a hard money loan, which is creative financing, right? But then we fix it up, sell it to someone else. 5 years later, I end up is actually an investor who took a bunch of classes that I taught, finds the contract, sells the property, ironically, to me. I keep the property for 5 years, and now I'm going to be selling that.
And the note got called due.
Yeah, and the note, and yeah, like this is a movie, right? You're like,
this is a movie.
This is a movie. Like, results not typical. Yes, they are, because this is happening, right? So that's a cool example of the power of seller financing. We were able to buy the first deal because the wholesaler trusted me, and I was able to explain the scenario for the seller, and the seller felt comfortable, and we helped her buy her property in Idaho, and then we helped the wholesaler on the second deal navigate through that paperwork, and I bought that property from them, and now we're selling the property now. So it's kind of an interesting scenario.
And I want to recap what you did on the initial purchase, because that's a creative use of creative finance. Most people think of seller financing for picking up rental properties so they don't have to go out and get a conventional mortgage of some kind. What you did actually was you had a deal where the sellers needed a cash out deal because they needed to go buy a new house. But they wanted to lease back for, or at least stay in the house 3 more months. And you did not want to sit on this property for 3 months with a high cost hard money loan. So you negotiated a short-term, almost bridge loan, seller financed, to cover those 3 months and save you hard money costs. You could easily apply that to an entire flip project.
Yep.
Okay, so seller finance is not just for buy and holds.
Matt,
it could be used for lots of different ways.
Matt, during the 2 months that she was there before she went to Idaho, did you rent the property to her? Did she pay rent?
Yeah, so she was responsible to make the payments like she did before.
Got it.
In lieu of rent.
So instead of renting, we drafted the documents. Actually, the first investor, who's a wholesaler, is a lawyer and a realtor. So he felt extremely confident with the scenario, and then wrote the appropriate language, simple enough for her to completely understand and feel comfortable. And we wanted to make sure, she was going to make her payments, because if she, in lieu of rent, she made the payment directly to the mortgage company, and then knowing 2 weeks before closing, I communicated with her lender up in Idaho. I'm a mortgage lender for going on 18 years. So we communicated with the lender in Idaho and made sure that we gave the appropriate documentation a week before needed, so it was easy for her to make that transition.
Great advanced planning and understanding how mortgages work, both on the seller financing and the seller, so that she could get the loan that she needed.
Yep.
Yeah, and it didn't cost you anything to hold it for those 2 months on seller financing, because she was paying the mortgage anyway.
Yeah, so the only investment that it was it was an investment of $10,000 initially because we paid that out of pocket, but we were happy to do that.
Sure.
Knowing what I know now, what I would have done different to make this better is I would have actually bought the property in a self-directed retirement account on the first one. I would have done that as a flip. Now, Jeff, you can talk about that later, the pros and the cons of a 401k, Roth
Another
IRA.
topic.
Yep, another topic. But knowing what I didn't really understand, how about I knew of it, but I didn't understand it. Now, what I should have done for sure on round two is bought that property with a self-direction, and the $7,000 out of pocket would have grown to about 130.
Over how many years?
7 years.
Not a bad return. Yes.
So yeah, actually, can we do the return real quick just for fun? Yoshi, do you have your calculator?
No.
Or do you have you don't have a Chinese calculator?
No.
What are those, Jeff? What's a Chinese calculator called? The things that
Abacus.
like you have a little.
It's an abacus.
Yeah. Okay. We'll let you guys teach another class on that.
I don't know if abacuses will do rates of return or amortizations.
Right. Okay. So yeah, that's so what I would have, knowing what I know now, doing different. And that's the cool thing about real estate investing is as we get more experience, then we can get more information, and then as we get the information, then we can implement. Then it's more second nature, and then as it's more second nature, we can have a lot more deal flow. So there's a lot of pros and cons to both of these.
Now, on the second round, and you bought it seller financing, and the note did get called due. Do you know how or why the bank found out and called the note due?
Yeah, absolutely. So the husband and wife, one speaks English, the other one does not speak very good English, and they had communication challenges, and they kept changing the address. So when we'd make the payments, we'd have to keep verifying information. And the spouse, I don't remember if it was the husband or wife, got frustrated with the other spouse, so they called the lender, and then the lender, like, what's going on? And then they dug into it more and called the note due. So, which is okay. We were happy to cure the loan. We completely made the payments on time the whole time because we didn't want to jeopardize their credit. But yeah, they definitely did an acceleration clause.
Yeah, and talk about other exit strategies. I think a big hurdle for a lot of people in seller financing when there's an underlying mortgage is the fear of the due on sale clause. What do you do? What happens? How does it work? Do I need to worry about it? What's your take on due on sale clause? What's your exit strategy? How do you structure things to maybe minimize that?
Yeah. So the most important thing is to make sure you keep open communication with the seller, right? Because the seller,
Absolutely.
things change for them. I've had 3 due on sale clauses. One of them, I provided the appropriate documentation that they withdrew it. This one that I just shared was the second one, and I have a third one that was just filed 3 months ago. So the third one is also because the seller dropped off the face of the earth, wouldn't communicate with us, wasn't responsive, changed emails, phone numbers, where they lived. So is really, I would say the 3 that have gone the least smooth is because the communication between us and the seller changed.
Somehow broke down.
So what do I? Yeah, broke down. Yeah, I'm gonna definitely say it's them because we're very responsive to communicate back. I would say I was less responsive when I first started. Way more responsive now. We want to be really good relationships with the sellers because it's a partnership. They're trusting us.
Absolutely.
And we're trusting them.
Matt, how often do you reach out?
Great question.
Do you have a scheduled quarterly reach out?
Annually in November. So I think, did you go to a Jimmy Napier seminar with Miyoshi?
Peter Fortunato.
You guys both went to Peter Fortunato's paper class. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Okay. So
Correct.
Jimmy
In Florida.
Napier is a Peter Fortunato buddy. Jimmy's probably a little older than Pete. But something that Peter Fortunato taught is if you communicate with your sellers every November, they always need extra capital at the end of the year or for Christmas. So that's something that we communicate with. If just communicating, that could be a principal reduction. You could pay them for a principal reduction. You could defer payments. You could modify the interest rate. It's a lot of different things that you could do, right? That's the cool thing is we all just think it's like black and white and only this way. And
Yeah, like one and
better
done.
yeah, yep. It's kind of like, yeah.
And
So
that's a
we
neat. I
know,
love that trick. I don't want to say that's a great, because if there's a benefit to them to taking your call in November, they're going to take the call. They're going to keep in touch with
yeah,
you because they might benefit from keeping in touch with you rather than disappearing on you.
yeah. I would definitely say everyone that keeps in contact with people that want to make life better is beneficial, right? That's why you guys are doing an awesome job teaming up to share different Zoom call like this, because you both have different perspectives here locally and internationally, as Yoshi is the stylist of the stars. So yeah, it's important to have good communication with both people for sure.
Good. And on do and sell clause exit strategies, hard money lenders close by.
Yeah. So number one, you should anticipate you're going to get it called,
And then
because if you
you
put
do
your
enough
head in the sand, yeah. But if you know that can happen, then you are going to plan for it, right? So multiple strategies is a hard money lender. You could sell the house back to the seller.
sell it back.
You could sell the house back to the seller. You could give them a note for the difference, right? So let's role play an example. Let's say Yoshi buys I don't know, let's say I get thrown in jail because I drive too fast, right? So I got to get a bail bondsman to lend me. I got to get a bail bondsman to lend me money because I'm a little light that month. So if I borrow money from Yoshi and I skip out on the bail, they might go lien Yoshi's house, right, Yoshi?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yep.
cool. So Jeff, he could be the bail bondsman. Jeff could say, hey, in lieu of, I just want my money back. Well, Yoshi could sell the house to the bail bondsman, right? And then the bail bondsman, but could also give a note to the bail bondsman to get the rest of their money back, so they don't have to do a quick fire sale. So I think a lot of times people, Yoshi, like that one?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times people forget they can sell the property and draft a note and do a carryback on private sales. That happens not frequently enough because people don't know to do that.
Yeah. So it's almost an inter-investor resolution, using some other investor kind of in the transaction to kind of bail you out.
Yep.
Absolutely. And just for the record, I've never been in jail or had to be bailed out. So if anyone's wondering why Matt asked me if I like that,
Yeah.
don't assume
So
I was because I was in jail.
the only reason I asked that is the only time I've actually gone to jail is I called Yoshi driving to get my fingerprints because I have gone to get booked before. Do you remember this, Yoshi?
I do, and you went to Lucky
Yeah.
13 as your last supper.
Yeah, so my last supper was at Lucky 13 getting the Celestial Burger. It's a great burger. But I called Yoshi before I booked myself to go to jail. So thank goodness I was able to walk right back out after there because of my charming personality.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, Matt, before we finish up here, with your experience level, what are 3 tips for a newer investor that you would give that wants to get started in seller financing?
Yeah, great suggestion. I think 3 tips. Number 1, get familiar with normal mortgage documents. So understand how a mortgage note reads, how to understand a deed of trust, how to understand reading a title report,
Amortization schedule.
amortization schedule. Be very, very familiar with financial calculators. also, I think understanding values, right? So, quick example with that. During the last market correction, I had three people I remember very specifically. They bought properties with seller financing, and they bought the properties with seller financing, not knowing what the value was, and they overpaid about by 15 to 20% because they didn't think about getting an appraisal. And the market went down, and they actually all gave the houses back to the owners.
Hmm.
So if they would have gotten appraisals or even known to get in comps, they just were so excited to buy a seller financing property, which was good. They just didn't know, to determine value, check comps, how much is it going to rent for, different things like that. So I think number one is knowing the loan docs. Here's the second thing for newer people. Understand the previous two market cycles. So as we understand the previous two market cycles, then it'll give you a better idea of balloon payments. Because a lot of times you can buy properties with seller financing. This is my personal opinion. I learned this from Bill Bronchek again. He calls it the 5-5-5. 5-5-5 is 5% down, 5% interest with a 5-year balloon. Those are the minimums. He does not want to he's happy to put less money down, and he's happy to get a lower interest rate, and he's
Or a longer term.
ecstatic, a longer balloon. But he's like, those are the bare minimum I'm willing to do because just too many things can happen quickly, right? So understanding the terms. The second one is, I think you either give someone full price with a 30-year amortization, or you ask for a discount with cash. And then third one is you give them a hybrid, right? You could give them I have a loan that's like a 17.5-year amortization at a 3.8% interest rate, because when I bought the property, the seller said, what are non-owner occupied interest rates at? And I told them, this was like 8 or 9 years ago. And he's like, well, I'm okay to earn that rate. And I don't know why I got 3.125, but I did. But he wanted a very specific monthly cash flow or payment to him. And we played with the amortization. He wanted a 15-year amortization. And I was like, man, I can't cash flow with that. That's tight. I'm totally fine to extend the amortization. So we actually extended it between 17 and 18 years. When I bought it, I didn't cash flow, but I broke even, which I was okay with because he only required like maybe $20,000 down at the time. And this property's in Murray. I bought it for like maybe 180, and it's maybe worth like 400 now. So, and he actually gave me 2 prepayment penalties. He gave me a prepayment penalty that he did not want to get paid back in 5 years, which was 6 months of a prepayment, because he wants the interest. And then he gave me a 10-year prepayment penalty, which was only 2 payments. And we actually wrote the documents to be able to do what's called the substitution of collateral. He will allow me to walk the mortgage from that property to another property if I choose to. So he's totally okay to get the same rate of return to help his cash flow in retirement, which is really awesome. So I'd say number 2 is be flexible with what you're presenting to the seller. And if you make it too complicated, they're going to say no, right? You gotta make it easy to understand. I got to be honest, I'm a pretty simple guy. I like things that easy to understand, but I also, if I don't understand, Yoshi and Jeff, you both know this, I'm going to ask a lot of questions because I do want to understand. That would be number 2. Number 3, what I would suggest is I would actually pick one strategy a year as a real estate investor to focus on. So if you're like, I want to understand seller financing, I would actually focus on, I think there's primarily 4 seller financing strategies primarily. And I'll pick a 5th one. Number 1 is you can do an all-inclusive deed of trust or a wrap. Great strategy. Number 2 is you can do a subject to. You're going to have the most control as the owner. Number 3, you can do an all-inclusive you can do just a deed of trust and a note.
Nope.
That's when the seller owns the property free and clear, which I have a bunch of those. So those are the 3 that I focus on. The 4th one is you can do a contract for deed. Anytime the seller is like, I'm familiar and comfortable with the contract for deed or land contract, I really understand that there's something they are not comfortable with to actually sign the deed over to me. So it's more important for me to understand what their concern is And then if I understand their concern and can give them a solution, then I'm buying it with seller financing normally. And I've actually been, anyone who's wanted to sell it with a contract for deed, as I find out what they really need or are concerned with, I've resolved it and they sold it to me regular. And then the last one, which is if you can't get any of those, is a lease option, right? At least it's establishing a way. So I think those are 5 different ways in general, but I think you understand one strategy a year and just kind of pick that up and put that in your arsenal, then you'll become a lot more seasoned investor.
Awesome. Amazing tips. Fantastic.
Very cool. Matt, who are you studying right now as far as bettering your creative financing skills?
I went to 2 commercial multifamily apartments in the last 6 months. I went last year to a workshop in Colorado, taught by a guy named AAA Adams. He spoke at a local RIA that I'm on the board of last year. I actually spoke that night with him. He did a good job presenting. So I got ideas about syndication and how to use the gap funding, just adding an extra 0. And then I also, in February of this year, went to a Brad Sumrock event. He is calls himself the Apartment King, is really good. I picked up a lot of different ideas. So I think that by me learning how to use these principles in larger dollar figure deals, it allows me to become more well-versed on the residential side. So those are the 2 people I've attended in the last 6 months. Before COVID-19, I'd actually written down to go to 4 multifamily workshops this year, one a quarter, just because I wanted to learn more from other individuals to see whose style or delivery I enjoy the most.
Awesome. Perfect.
Yeah.
So can I ask a question? Can I ask a question for you 2 guys?
Absolutely.
Yoshi, what was your top 3 takeaways that you got from this information that we just shared?
From you, the good one, I would say first one is always just plan on the due on sale clause happening, even though the chances are very rare. Have a backup plan. I would say the second takeaway was using hard money as your backup plan to basically get out of that initial loan as quickly as possible. The third takeaway was probably how small of a world it is that you can buy your house twice.
It is a small community. World. Deals do come back around.
Yeah, small lakes. They call it Salt Lake City, right? Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
Cool. Jeff, what about your takeaways? Just
yeah,
curious.
I think the biggest takeaway, and I think one of the most important things, is really, really, really understanding mortgages, mortgage terms, and how they play into the negotiations with the sellers and structuring the deal. Because the more you understand about how amortization rates work, interest rates, pay downs, you can use that information to negotiate better terms, rather than like, if a seller says, hey, yeah, I'll do 15-year amort at 5%. But if you know things, you can say, well, let's do maybe like you did in your creative way, 17 to 19 year, or with prepayment penalties, or with walking notes and deeds. So the more you understand how mortgages work, the more control you have over structuring the deal in a way that's going to be more beneficial than just, oh, it's my first seller financing deal and I'm happy to have it. I think that is absolutely critical. And if you sell on seller financing, the math becomes even more critical of understanding how mortgages work. And a lot of investors understand buying on seller financing. They're much less experienced and knowledgeable in selling on seller financing, or even sitting in a sandwich of buying and then turning around, selling, and staying in the middle. And it's all about the numbers. And if you don't know how those numbers work, you're going to find yourself in trouble.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. You know, when you guys asked who am I learning the most from right now with creative financing or seller financing, I would say the 3 people that have been the most impactful was actually Peter Fortunato's number 1. Holy cow, that guy knows how to freaking structure deals. Jimmy Napier is number 2, and actually I would say Bill Bronchek was number 3. I've listened to Bill Bronchek's creative financing class, I think 4 times live. And every time I pick up a ton of information of things that are just not ingrained. But I've seen Jimmy Napier, I think 4 times, and Jimmy Napier 3 times, and Peter Fortunato definitely 4 times. So those guys just have a lot of wisdom, and you'd have a lot of wisdom when you're in your 70s as full-time real estate investors for 40 years plus.
Perfect.
So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt, for joining us on Deals A to Z. It was always awesome to speak with you and learn from you. It's always amazing.
I agree.
Well, thanks for letting me participate. Hope you guys have an amazing Mother's Day.
Okay, and if people want to get in touch with you, how can they get in touch with you if they need to?
Yeah, you bet. Great question. Best email is matkinson, ATKINSON, matkinson@intercaplending.com. Intercap is INTERCAP, lending, LENDING.com. If you're interested in different classes that I teach, you can go to MJA Real Consulting, MJARealconsulting.com. So if you guys put in the subject line, I listen to Jeff and Yoshi's podcast or presentation, then I'll know. Then I'll take the time to talk to you a little longer than what I normally do. So
awesome.
Thank you for this opportunity. This was a fun topic to share.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks,
appreciate
guys.
it.
Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.